I saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the view of Wolfpack Research or any of its officers. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on this program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. We are not investment advisors. We hold no registrations with the SEC, FINRA, or any other regulatory agency, and none of the opinions expressed on this podcast should be considered investment advice. The listener should assume that we have positions in and stand to benefit from any stock or other security mentioned on this podcast. Do your own research before making investment decisions.
Welcome to the Wolf Den, everybody. This is Dan David coming back at you with the pack. And by pack, I mean Sound Carl.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Let's hope that's all Sound Carl says the whole time. And Sound Andrew, because it bothers Sound Carl that I gave Andrew a name. Today we have Dr. Matthew Hamill. Is an assistant professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins University, where he studies all aspects of sexually transmitted infections, STIs, and HIV. This includes prevention, treatment, and retention and care, research, focus, and rapid point-of-care diagnosis for STI and low-income settings as well, which we all greatly appreciate. He provides patient-focused treatment for those with risk of STI, HIV, including pre-exposure. Dr. Hamill is UK-trained physician. He received his medical degree in 1998, trained in internal medicine, followed by sexual health HIV training in London, UK, and spent 3 years conducting research in Soweto, South Africa. In addition to his primary affiliation with Johns Hopkins University of Medicine, he is also affiliated with the Department of Population, Family, and Reproductive Health at the Bloomberg School of Health. Thank you, Michael Bloomberg. So, Dr. Hamill, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we have a bit to cover here. Your massive background in HIV and AIDS, I still think that is something that we don't talk about enough. It's still around, but prescient in the news is monkeypox. And I assume you've done some work or study on that as well. What would you like to talk about first?
Kind of go back and address your first question about HIV and it still being a problem. I just wanted to endorse that comment that HIV and AIDS are still huge problems globally. 38 million people living with HIV is estimated. Wow. The landscape of HIV and AIDS has changed dramatically since the mid to late 1990s, but hundreds of thousands of people are either becoming newly infected or dying each year, and that includes adults and children all over the world.
You make the comment that the landscape has changed a great deal since the 1990s. I'll tell you something. It's changed a great deal since the 1980s.
I mean, one way of looking at it is that HIV epidemic had its infancy and childhood in the 80s, and then another stage in the 90s when highly active antiretroviral therapy became available and more widely available. And then more recently, in the last couple of decades, HIV has changed dramatically. So people have a near normal life expectancy. Children, people are doing the jobs that they want to do. Most people are taking a single pill once a day.
Wow.
Oh, it's not the Magic Johnson cocktail anymore?
No, it's the year 2000. People were still taking numerous pills 3 times a day, sometimes on an empty stomach, sometimes with a liter of water, and had a lot of side effects.
Yeah, it's very toxic, some of those pills.
Right. And, people really endured some of those side effects because there wasn't really a choice. The choice was, take the available medication and survive, or if you didn't take the available medication, then your life would be limited. Whereas now, in 2022, when I meet a patient living with HIV for the first time and start them on therapy, my outlook is really positive. I show them the options, of which there are many. There are many single pill combinations where 3 drugs or more are squeezed together into a single pill. And then, some of these pills are quite small. They're not big horse pills.
It's nice to know the clinical term is horse pill from a doctor.
Yeah, I think that
universal.
I think that might be my clinical term. Rather.
No, we all use it. There you go. I think my experience is, I think I'm a bit older than you, doctor. I lived through as a teenager and early adult, the late 80s and 90s, and devastating. absolutely devastating. I lost family members. My aunt had 3 brothers that were hemophiliacs and 2 nephews, all died in the late 80s and 90s. You know, the gay community was absolutely ravaged. Lost many friends there too. And it was just a horrible thing to see, right? That existed back then, prolonged your life in such a way that it made it horrible for the last 6 months to a year, I think. And then you end up dying of complications like pneumonia related to HIV. So I can tell you where I was when Magic Johnson came out and said, I have AIDS. I mean, it was like one of those moments where, like, Carl can tell you where he was when Princess Di died. That it was a moment like that for me with Magic Johnson. It's amazing that he's alive today. And like he says, he's cured. Is that true that he's cured? Can you be cured?
The response to that question is complicated. I preface a lot of my responses with that there are now 4 people in the world who have been cured of HIV. And that means that somebody who was living with HIV received a stem cell transplant, and they were transplanted with cells that are resistant to HIV. So if you imagine that so these are 4 people with aggressive cancers who had to essentially have their immune systems wiped out,
right,
and replaced with a donor immune system where there's a genetic mutation, which means those immune cells are essentially resistant to acquiring HIV. So there are 4 people who are cured.
Like a painful reset button.
Yeah, well, a reset button that your chances of dying are pretty high.
Oh,
wow! The procedure itself is dangerous. Then,
well, the having an aggressive malignancy and having a bone marrow transplant where you are rendered defenseless to common organisms that
right,
other people would encounter in their daily lives and have no symptoms whatsoever. So people talk about cure, and patients who I provide care for will frequently ask me about cure. You know, my response is that the people who have been cured in inverted commas are those who may have easily lost their lives. It's just that the hematologists, the oncologists who were taking care of them, they had the presence of mind to find a donor that had this specific mutation.
And didn't those people like always exist? Because I did have somebody in my life who had been with somebody for, turns out, a period of time that had AIDS, or was at least HIV positive, I should say. And this person just was completely immune to it.
Yeah, there's a genetic mutation. It's called a delta 33 mutation deletion. Changes the configuration of the sort of the docking station, if you like, on the surface of immune cells that HIV, the virus targets
and attaches to.
Right, and because that attachment molecule is changed because of this genetic mutation, then the virus cannot attach, so can't get inserted into the immune cell and then integrate and stuff. There are lots of speculation as to why these people exist, and it's estimated that somewhere in the region of 10% of people with Northern European descent will have this mutation.
This person was Northern European.
Some of the previous hypotheses were that because the bacteria that causes plague uses the same sort of docking mechanism, then people with that mutation were selected for during the plague in medieval
bubonic plague.
Yeah, I guess it's normal to have a percentage of the population that's immune from some of these plagues, whether it be, as Carl so eloquently put, the bubonic plague, or even like COVID, or things of this nature.
Yeah, we all have our own genetic makeup that makes us different from other people, and we respond to different infections in different ways. Some people will be relatively resistant to becoming infected, and others will have very mild disease, and then another person could have be exposed to exactly the same organism and do really badly. So get very sick, develop sepsis and die.
So if there are 4 people that have been cured with this bone marrow transplant, and arguably from the people who are resistant, you're taking these strains, I'd even heard in some Asian countries, I believe China, they're
the twins. They genetically
edited a couple of girls to be HIV resistant. Is that true?
To the best of my knowledge, that's true. That was a highly controversial sort of scientific experiment, if that's the correct terminology to use.
They have a different kind of FDA over there.
Not the same approval.
Right. And, to be honest with you, I don't know enough about the science and the validity.
So you're talking about CRISPR, the gene editing.
Right. I think that's the technique that the Chinese scientists use to sort of genetically engineer those twins. With the same principle, you're sort of creating this environment, this sort of cellular immunological environment that is resistant to acquiring HIV.
For those who do, and you said 38 million people are living with it today, I imagine there's some number of people that get it every day. What's the prognosis for them?
So for people being diagnosed with HIV in 2020, the prognosis, generally speaking, is excellent.
Other than you have HIV.
Right.
Yeah.
So and the analogy that I make when I'm having these discussions with patients is that HIV is a chronic manageable condition that can be very well managed by an individual patient in conjunction with their provider. So much so that their life expectancy is pretty much on par with somebody who is not living with HIV. So the prognosis in that respect is really excellent. And if you compare that with the prognosis, for instance, of somebody with poorly controlled diabetes or untreated hypertension or chronic airways disease, all of those things that can really have an impact on life expectancy, then living with HIV compares very favorably to some of those other chronic manageable medical conditions. When I have that conversation, I don't try and pretend that living with HIV is the same as living with high blood pressure, because there are still stigmas attached to HIV that aren't attached to other.
Yeah, unfortunately, I would agree.
Unfortunately, I completely agree too that this is still a case. I think the prognosis also depends on who you are and where you live. And by that, I mean...
Yeah, your access to medical treatment.
Yeah, your access to medical treatment, whether that's in the US, whether that's in resource-limited settings, that access is key. And it all starts really with the point of entry is a person having a test and getting diagnosed. And it sounds so straightforward and so easy. Well, somebody just needs to get a HIV test, but we know that there are so many barriers that are put in people's way to prevent them taking that really basic step of knowing their HIV status.
Even here in the United States, much less in a third world country.
I think in the United States, the barriers can be really huge. And I've worked in South Africa where HIV testing is so normalized. It's part of most medical consultations. So people don't have to go out and seek testing in the same way, and that there are there's a whole culture of voluntary counselling and testing available in a very mainstream way in places like South Africa, for instance, that aren't available in the same way here in the US.
Well, you don't have to convince us that our medical system is screwed up. We're on board.
Yeah,
we're there. Okay, so I guess the prognosis way better than the late 90s and light years better than the late 80s, which is great. It's still not something you want to get, but if you do, medical treatment, and I guess what we do best, I think, here in the United States, which maybe you can opine on this, doctor. It seems like we're very, very good at making something chronic and livable and at a cost every day. And I used to really hammer that point home before they went ahead and cured hepatitis B or something. We finally cured something, and Jonas Salk can rest. He wasn't the last person. But why do you think it is that we don't really cure anything?
Well, my own field of infectious diseases and STIs in particular, then I would push back on that statement. I think that we cure a lot. So we cure a lot of STIs, so things like chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, all of which. Yeah,
back in the 50s and 60s. I mean, as much as science has come forward, we still can't cure, I guess, herpes, right?
Correct. We can't cure herpes. We can't cure HIV. Hepatitis C treatment and cure has been an amazing progress in recent decades. But you're right. There are many infectious diseases that cannot be cured. There are many that can. Some of the big killers, like malaria, tuberculosis, for instance, they can be cured. And then in non-infectious diseases or non-communicable diseases, so things like hypertension and diabetes, they can be cured. So type 2 diabetes can often be cured.
Yeah, by one's self-restraint.
By methods that sound in theoretically really easy, but are in fact are some of the most challenging with things to work with patients on. So behavioral changes that could lead to cure of diabetes is certainly possible, and I've seen it many times, both in my medical career and in my family life. It's incredibly difficult to do, and the sustained weight loss and exercise that's required to keep the diabetes at bay is a huge commitment. And we live in a society where the nutritional environment that we live in is just not conducive to our health.
Yeah, agreed. Here in the United States, particularly, self-control is not our best feature. Many of the diseases you've talked about that there are cures for, there have been. I've struggled over the last 30 years with the amount of science and money that we put into it. Seems like we did our best work in the 50s and 60s,
Well, one way of looking at it is that the sort of the low-hanging fruit, if you like, some of the infectious conditions that have been either eradicated, like smallpox, or where there are excellent vaccines to prevent, like measles. In some ways, they're low-hanging fruit. I'm not trying to diminish the achievement of that generation of scientists who were able to develop and roll out those vaccines. But some of the conditions, like HIV, for instance, it's like chasing a moving target. So the virus mutates at a phenomenal rate, and trying to develop a vaccine that sort of can control a virus that mutates so rapidly is technically extremely challenging. And the other thing is that some of these viruses, like the herpes viruses, like HIV, once you acquire them, they become integrated into your genome. One clarifying thing that I said, I think before when I mentioned the deletion, I said Delta 33, it's Delta 32.
Yeah, I was going to correct you on that.
Now I'm paralyzed with self-doubt, and it's all I can do not to get on my phone and double check. It's one of them.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a Delta 30s.
You should just be, if you were an American, you'd just be safe and take them both and hope for the best. So this takes us into monkeypox, which is very much so in the news. And for a lot of our listeners who are nominally in the market, could have made some money on some of these moving stocks that are either legitimately helping with monkeypox or just putting in a press release and really just bullshit. We'll be pointing some of those out later. What's the prognosis here? This seems to be growing at an exponential rate. Well, it's not as contagious as COVID. It's contagious to a handshake, I guess I read.
So monkeypox is, as you say, it's a growing problem, and cases have increased at an alarming rate across the globe in recent months. So just to kind of give a bit of context, so monkeypox was first recognized as an entity in the 50s, and the first case in humans was identified in 1970. This existed and is endemic to parts of West and Central Africa. So it's a condition that crops up there, and that there are outbreaks. One of the hypotheses is that because smallpox and monkeypox are in the same family, in the orthopox family of viruses, that people who got smallpox vaccine, so people older than you and I, and the generation older than ours, received smallpox vaccination, and they were relatively protected against monkeypox infection. So since May of this year, first starting in the UK and then in June recognized in the US, monkeypox has spread across the globe in countries that are not historically, where monkeypox is not historically endemic. And you said about it's not as deadly as COVID.
I was reading a Times article today. I mean, I'll read the New York Times from time to time. I believe they did say, like, it's not airborne. It's not as, arguably not as deadly because there are already treatments. As you had pointed out, as part of the pox family, there are treatments for it. It's just it's very painful.
Yeah, I think the thing about monkeypox is that in comparison with COVID, that it is much less easily spread within the community. You remember how when COVID came, it really swept across the nation.
Yeah, I was there. That was painful.
And despite us having good treatments for COVID, excellent vaccines, there are still hundreds of people dying from COVID-19 in the US each day. With monkeypox, where there have been in the region of 6,000 cases diagnosed as part of this 2022 outbreak, then there have been 5 deaths reported to date. There is a lot of fear. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of worry that you can sit on a park bench that somebody with monkeypox has sat on and then acquire infection.
Yeah, I haven't read anything like that anywhere, like from Dead Services. When I said shake hands, that's sweat to possibly cut contact, things of this nature. It's generally sexually transmitted, or I would say making out, even kissing, whatever.
There's a couple of things that you said there that I just wanted to respond to. So the way that monkeypox is spread most efficiently is by close, intimate skin-to-skin contact, and that can be sexual or non-sexual. It can be spread from items that contain monkeypox scabs, towels, bed sheets. If somebody with monkeypox has used those items and then somebody else handles them closely, then it's possible that monkeypox can be spread that way. Secretions like saliva, which often is involved in kissing or other intimate contact. The question about whether monkeypox is an STI or sexually transmitted infection is contentious, I think it's fair to say. Globally and historically, the sexual transmission was not its main mode of spread. What we're seeing in the current outbreak is that around 95% of cases are thought to have been acquired as part of sexual exposure.
Well, that's a rather high percentage. That should be considered for anybody that would think they would be at risk. I see you don't call for panic. We're not wiping down every surface. Well, we're already doing that with COVID.
Washing your vegetables in bleach. I think that monkeypox, at least in the US, at least right now, is within certain sexual networks, social and sexual networks, so predominantly in men who have sex with other men. But monkeypox has been described in children through non-sexual contact and in people who are not part of that particular sexual network. So there's a time when a contained epidemic can spread. Sexual networks are not these sort of hermetically sealed units, as some people think. Sexuality is fluid. People, are part of different sexual networks, and that's how an infection like monkeypox can break through and start to become generalized. I think we can do things about it. We have a vaccine. We have treatments. We have a lot of knowledge around transmission. And we can provide good public health messaging to people so that they can be informed, they make informed decisions about, what they want to do, particularly around their sex lives.
Now, is this a true vaccine, or is it like the COVID vaccines where it's really immunization that gives you a period of time where you're more resistant? I grew up with vaccine, meaning you don't have to worry about this shit anymore, right?
You're good.
Now we got to worry about mutations, I guess.
I think we've always had to worry about that. Well, in things like flu, for instance, influenza, we need to get a new vaccine every year because the virus mutates, and you have to develop a new vaccine to sort of match that mutation. And we've seen the same thing with COVID-19, where it mutates readily. In terms of the vaccine against monkeypox, it's a much more familiar technology. It consists of a virus, and it's the virus that is given to the recipient, and then we make an immune response to that virus. There are two different vaccines that could be used against monkeypox. There's the existing sort of well-known smallpox vaccine. The issue there is that is a live vaccine, so it replicates within the person and can cause disease. And then there's the Jynneos vaccine that's also contains a virus, but that virus is replication deficient, so it cannot grow within the person who's been vaccinated.
Like the flu shot.
Like a flu shot.
It's a dead chicken embryo or grown in there.
I don't know how it's a great question. I don't know how the MVA, which is the virus that is the sort of the vehicle for both of those vaccines, is produced, whether it's I think it is in eggs, because one of the...
Well, the flu shot is, for sure. I'm not sure about monkeypox.
Yeah, well, one of the concerns is if someone has a serious allergy to eggs.
They do have an alternative for them. And I don't mean death. I just mean, like, that is a question that's asked when you have allergies. There are other ways to grow it, but generally that's been the easiest. So how did we get the name monkeypox? I mean, you said it's been around for a very, very long time. I find it to be an unfortunate name. I don't want any pox, but I don't want to be a monkey either. Or this is like, there's always that fabled kind of every disease comes from a pig, a bat, or a monkey.
Right. So, in centuries past, other infections were called the pox. And, pox describes the appearance that these infections create.
Right. A pox on all your houses, right?
Right. So the pox bit, I think, is kind of is very evocative. I think it produces a sort of an emotional response in somebody when they start thinking about pox infection. Except when we talk about chicken pox, nobody kind of gets too stressed out about that.
Well, who doesn't love chicken?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't eat monkeys, but I'll have myself some chicken.
Neither of those things that I would like to eat, but
you don't eat chicken either.
I do not. No.
Okay, well, you're missing out. In any event, yeah, I'm going to interject my opinion here just to say that part of the chicken pox people aren't worried about is when you're a kid. I mean, you're encouraged to get it. Like, I mean, they'll send you to a chicken pox party. Maybe
in our childhood, that was true. But now there's a great vaccine, and most children are immunized against varicella, which is the virus that causes chickenpox and shingles. Yeah, and it's about the familiarity too. Chickens we all kind of know and many people love. I'm not one of them.
Yeah, benign, innocuous, whatever. Monkeys, I don't know. They're just so close to us.
A little exotic.
Monkeys are, and primates are very similar to us. And that is one of the reasons why this virus is capable of infecting both monkeys and right.
Oh, it is.
But the monkey name came because it was recognized in monkeys, but that's not thought to be the main animal host that sort of carries this virus around. We think that that's in things like rodents in particular.
We're back to the rats and the black plague again, huh?
Plague, yeah. So it's not the bat from the wet market that did all the damage. It's the monkey.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I don't think rat pox sounds any better.
So there'd be a different stigma on that one.
So what's the prognosis here? So we have a vaccine. This is treatable. We have 5 people out of 6,000 that have died. I would imagine, I don't know, maybe some comorbidities involved there that played a role.
Certainly, the report, there's not full information on the reports. At least one of the individuals who died in Brazil was somebody with immunocompromised. The others in Spain, I don't know about the medical history. I understand that one was young and relatively fit, but I don't know the details of that.
Well, we miss a lot of details on these things, and it brings me back to one of the questions I've been asking for a couple of years. What is the WHO for? And not the rock band, the ineffective organization that is arguably or often accused of being corrupt. How helpful do you find?
I find them really helpful. I think, they're the organization that I look to for, guidance, advice. I think they get a bad rap. Well, I think it depends who you talk to. Some people like me love the WHO and think that it serves an incredibly important purpose. Any huge organization is not perfect. I completely acknowledge that, but I think that the work that it does really helps to save lives. That's certainly my opinion. We talked just before about what prognosis for monkeypox is, and one of the things that I just would like to stress is that the vast majority of people who get this infection have a mild, self-limiting infection. They don't need to go to hospital. Nothing bad happens to them. Within about 2 to 4 weeks, their rash resolves and their skin returns to normal, and then they get on with their lives. Can get overlooked when there's something as new as this that's kind of entering into the public consciousness.
And it's pretty apparent they have it, right? It's not like COVID where you could have it for 2 weeks and not know it and be spreading it everywhere. Like when you get the rash,
when you get the rash, you've got it. For sure, and you're infectious during the time from when you develop the rash until all of the lesions have scabbed and new skin has grown underneath. But we're learning a lot about monkeypox during this current epidemic because there are a significant proportion of people who don't get the warning signs that they're developing monkeypox. So traditionally, you think that there's something called a prodrome. So like when you sort of like with flu, where you feel unwell for a couple of days with sort of aches and pains. The same thing classically is associated with monkeypox. So a person may have a fever, headache, muscle aches, and then develop the rash. But what we're seeing, and I've certainly seen myself, is that somebody doesn't have any of those warning signs. They go straight on to develop a rash. And then there are data coming through that there are people who may have monkeypox and have no symptoms whatsoever. So I think I think we will understand a lot more about the natural history of monkeypox at the end of this year than we did at the beginning of the year.
Okay. Does it, as far as the rash goes, does it present in any certain place, arm, stomach, or could it come from anywhere, leg? Yeah,
it can certainly be on any part of the body. More classically, you would see it on the limbs, on the face. What we're seeing in the current outbreak is genital lesions and perianal lesions. And I think that's one of the other reasons that...
perianal lesions? Oh my God, that's got to be painful.
And that is one of the real problems with monkeypox. So I can say that this is a mild self-limiting illness, and that is true for most people. People who get rectal infection with monkeypox can be in incredible pain. And it's miserable, like really miserable. They can't, they're in constant pain. They can't use the bathroom. When they try to use the bathroom, then it makes things worse. So people get constipated, avoiding using the bathroom. So I think that's one of the features of monkeypox that we're currently seeing is that, a significant proportion of people who end up in hospital, even though that's the minority, are in there for pain control.
You get monkeypox, you're like, thank God it's on my arm. It could be worse. I think one of the things you're saying, look, this is something we need to take seriously. We need to study. Thank goodness we're ahead of it.
I don't think we're ahead of it.
No. Well, as far as like, we're not developing a vaccine like we did for COVID, right? We have therapies.
We have a vaccine, but it isn't available. There's
the FDA let the license expire or whatever, right? Wasn't it a couple of weeks ago? They missed ordered or they didn't renew the order.
Yes, I don't know the details of that, but yeah, that's my understanding. That so we have this vaccine, but people can't get it. People are calling and calling to try and get access to, a few hundred or a few thousand vaccines when the people who are at risk are in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands.
So couldn't Uncle Joe just say, listen, warp speed, we need some of this whipped up
wartime act.
Yeah. Post haste.
I think that's what is happening. Yes, it's certainly what we need. So we need to capitalize on the public health infrastructure that came with COVID and, use that infrastructure to be able to offer immunization to people at risk to try and prevent this from becoming a more generalized epidemic within the US.
I think that's even a remote possibility. Whoa.
I do. I certainly hope that doesn't happen. And I think that some of the comparisons with HIV have been kind of overblown or done in an insensitive way. But if you think back to the 1984, 1985, then HIV was considered a disease that only affected gay men.
Well, look, we're always going to have bigots and homophobes. If you're listening, stop listening. You're not helping society in any way. It does bother me in the sense that, okay, as if like in the last couple of weeks, we have 6,000 cases. I just leaped to the assumption after coming out of COVID and how miserable that was, that we're jumping through hoops to make sure that this doesn't become pandemic or an epidemic.
Yeah. And I think that, we have the resources. We know what we need to do. The availability of vaccine is a real rate limiting step. And I think it's causing a huge amount of frustration in both communities who are most impacted by monkeypox, as well as providers who really want to do something in order to offer some protection to the communities that we serve.
And what is the vaccine? Is it what is the name of it? I don't actually know the name of it.
The one that we're using is called Jynneos. Yeah, or Jynneos, depending on one's pronunciation. Yours will be better than mine, so I think go with.
Are you going to say aluminium?
We can have a whole podcast on that. Yeah.
Well, we're not going to. It's aluminum. It's salt.
I stand corrected.
That's all it is. Andrew was just kind of piping.
That's the certainly the stock that's trading. It's a
is that SIGA?
Vaccine company. No, SIGA makes a treatment for it. The vaccine's at Bavaria Nordisk or something like that.
Okay. Novo Nordisk?
We could Google it.
Okay. Yeah. That's what Carl is supposed to be for. All right. Well, we're going to get that information out on Twitter so people do know. We're not going to guess. We're going to that at Delta 32 or 3. That's going to be out there. We're going to
I won't be able to look at my colleagues in the eye at Hopkins.
Nobody looks each other in the eye there anyway. You guys are always looking down at your charts.
It is Bavarian Nordic.
Bavarian Nordic. There you go.
One in a row.
One in a row for Andrew. So, yeah, that's the vaccine we need. Is there anything else anybody needs to know about monkeypox, HIV in general, any other kind of STD or?
Yeah, I think that the message around STIs is one of real.
We don't call them STDs anymore. Is that the message?
Kind of being reframed as a sexually transmitted infection.
New branding.
Rather than a disease. A disease implies that somebody has sort of signs or symptoms.
And Dr. Hamill, it is Delta 32. I expect an honorary doctorate from Johns Hopkins.
I've got a piece of paper here. I'm just scribing it as.
Believe me, any degree Carl has is just a piece of paper.
Thank you for that, Carl.
All six of them.
Clarification.
I'm sorry, we interrupted you. You were talking about STIs.
Yeah, so the 2020 surveillance data that came out, so that's the most up-to-date data that we have, show that gonorrhea and syphilis are at an all-time high.
What the hell?
Nursing homes.
Why do you become an expert all of a sudden on like long bygone sexually transmitted, whatever the I stands for?
It's the branding. It's the branding. Nursing homes, the STIs are rampant in nursing homes.
Is that true, doctor?
No, not that I know of.
Oh, I love it.
I think that I'm not sure what that statement is based on, but I think we have seen.
He's Googling stuff. Don't be impressed.
Well, an advantage that I don't have. Certainly, we've seen increases in some STIs in older people, but to my knowledge, they're not rampant in nursing homes. I stand to be corrected. So those infections are increasing. Congenital syphilis, where a baby is born with syphilis or dies in utero, the rate has increased by more than 200% in the previous 5 years. It's astonishing. It's terrible.
Why?
It's a completely preventable situation. We shouldn't be seeing congenital syphilis in the US in 2022. Partly it is around provision of prenatal services. Partly it's around sort of real terms divestment in sexual health services. Partly it's driven by substance use disorder. So there are many things that are in play, particularly when we're talking around congenital syphilis infection. So that's just to give it a bit of context. Things are, things like HIV care and management. We've got every cause to be optimistic about that. The other STIs are running out of control in many parts of the country. I think other sort of kind of good news stories when we're thinking about HIV and sexual health and well-being. So HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis, so PrEP, is something that has really transformed many people's lives. So either a daily pill or now by injection, people can access preventative measures, which mean that if they come into contact with somebody who has untreated HIV, their risk of acquiring infection is extremely low. So that's a good news story, that PrEP is something that has changed many people's lives. It's still not being accessed by many of the people who need it most, but it's definitely out there and available.
We even have a treatment for falling in love with somebody who has HIV.
So in recent years, we've sort of discovered, and we feel very confident about as a medical community, that if somebody's living with HIV, they're on treatment, they have an undetectable viral load, then they cannot transmit infection sexually to another person. So the campaign is U equals U, so undetectable, so that the viral load is undetectable in blood, equals U. The second U stands for untransmissible.
But you would still want to take the preventative if you were the partner.
You might, many don't. There are couples and individuals who make decisions within the context of that relationship, but there are data now in heterosexual people, in men who have sex with men, that undetectable equals untransmissible. So that there isn't a risk of transmitting HIV to a sex partner.
Charlie Sheen with, was it Brie Larson or whatever? The porn star sued him over that.
The minute there's some kind of Chiron or something that comes across as Charlie Sheen, I stop listening. And that's been that way for like 20 years. I'm done with that guy.
Cool, he went to Mexico, got the cure.
But I will say this, the whole monkeypox and HIV, us guys get it. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to be a guy. I mean, gay men are really getting it bad. I mean, gay women seem to get away with it. They don't really have the stigma or the diseases involved. And every time they think we have it great, look at this stuff. This is not easy stuff to deal with.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with you. And I think that in large part that is really driven by stigma. A child with monkeypox that has acquired that infection because of contact, household contact with a person with infection, or from another child, there's very little stigma, I think, attached to that. I think you take the same virus and you put it into an adult within a sexual, where the transmission is within a sexual context, then people assign blame. Yeah, they become accusatory and shunning, and I think those are the things that I don't think judgy is a word in that context, but you know what I mean.
No, I think it's appropriate. I think I've seen that, and look, I think we've come a long way as a society with acceptance of individual choice. We're just looking for the communicable diseases to play along too. Spread it around a little bit.
They're not real tolerant of unvaccinated COVID people. I mean,
I'm not tolerant of unvaccinated.
Tolerant of everybody, but I mean, the first question anybody gets is, are you vaccinated if you have COVID?
And yeah,
Look, I had my own personal experience with that. I had to go to a pharmacy when I had COVID, and my pharmacist was kind of huffy and puffy about it. And and I did, of course, but he's asking me if I got vaccinated. And I'm like, I just wanted to slam the guy's head through the counter. I am asking for what was prescribed by my doctor. You're supposed to fill it.
Right. It's like this.
I don't
And
need
by
your
the
judgment.
way, if you really cared, you wouldn't make me use this universal pen attached to this credit card machine to sign something, in the most disease-ridden place on the planet.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, you just brought up a really bad memory.
I can tell that just by.
Oh, I was mad.
And it's like people, I've seen so many patients over the years who will have seen other providers, and often the first question is, how did you get it? As if that is of any relevance.
Well, it is to the doctor, but not to the pharmacist.
It can be of relevance, but in terms of thinking about somebody holistically and what their risks might be for other things. But as an opening gambit, when you're having a conversation with somebody whose life is changing in front of you, to ask a question that has got a judgment attached to it, I think most people would feel it that way. I think that we are judgmental, and it serves no good purpose, particularly when we're trying to address communicable diseases.
Totally agree, and I applaud you for your work. There are a few occasions where we have people that are doing so-called God's work, certainly selfless work and dangerous at times, if not to your own health, your mental health, because it's a sad business to be in when things don't work out.
That is true. But, I have to say that I love my job. I've been a doctor since 1998, and I consider it a real privilege. I love it. I love coming to work. I love hearing people's stories. I love being part of it's not the work that I do. People do work for themselves, and I just guide them along the way. And I think, there's no job like it.
Activist short selling. You find a company and you pick a fight with it. That's really healthy. I can tell you love what you do. I hope there are many more people like you that we get to speak to. And how can people follow your work?
I have some published work on generally around STIs. If people are interested in that, I don't have a Twitter.
Can you actually hear Carl breathing to get in here to talk about the nursing homes again?
No, I'm not.
Well, we appreciate your time, Dr. Hamill, and we wish you the best. And look, if this thing goes badly, we hope it doesn't, but maybe we'll have you back as a returning champion. If 6,000 goes to 600,000, people are going to want to hear more about it. Dr. Matthew Hamill, everybody, and thank you for joining us.